Hello and welcome. For those of you just joining us today, my name's Jonathan Doe, and I like to collect artifacts and relics from infamous true crime cases. And this is my show, where I share with you pieces from that collection and the stories behind them. In today's episode, what I have to share is an original 1978 Newsweek magazine centered around the Jonestown Massacre. But that is not the highlight of this episode. In fact, today's episode is the start of something new, something special. This is the start of a series that I'm starting for this channel called Cult Talk. And within Cult Talk, I'm going to have my good friend Taylor James from Cult Collectibles, Canada's largest Murderabilia dealer, as well as an expert when it comes to cults, as we do a deep dive on an infamous case within human history. Not only will Taylor be sharing his expertise when it comes to his knowledge about the People's Temple and the Jonestown Massacre, but he will also be sharing his large collection of artifacts centered around the case. So this is going to be a big one. Buckle up. This is Murderabilia Show and Tell.
Last November, these were pictures that shocked the world. Views of one man's dream that he turned into a nightmare, a place of paradise that became a hell for hundreds of people who'd put their faith in him. For this was the scene of the now legendary massacre at Jonestown, where 1,000 men, women, and children died in a bizarre orgy of suicide and murder led by Jim Jones, a self-styled pastor and social philosopher. Jones convinced thousands that their salvation lay in following his doomed attempt at idealism. He set up his own People's Temple. The temple's creed was racial equality and freedom for all. But allegations of corruption and brutality forced Jones to leave his converted synagogue in California and lead his disciples to a promised land in Guyana. Reports that he was keeping disaffected followers against their will there prompted an investigation by Congressman Lee Ryan and a team of newsmen. But tragedy struck when Jones's supporters opened fire on the fact-finding party as they prepared to leave. The bodies were flown back to the United States amid rumors that Jones was organizing a mass suicide ritual at his farming commune. Of course, those rumors would prove fatefully accurate. Knowing that the execution of the fact-finders had been bungled and that the truth would soon be common knowledge, Jones instructed his fanatical followers to drink poison and shot those who refused.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Murderabilia Show and Tell. I'm sitting here over Zoom with Taylor, the owner of Cult Collectibles and the expert on anything related to cults. And today we are talking about the People's Temple, the infamous Jonestown Massacre. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. So I kind of want to just pick your brain a little bit and have you kind of give an overview of People's Temple and Jim Jones and kind of like the early days when they were in the United States and then ultimately how they transitioned over overseas. What can you tell us about that?
So my education on it is kind of based on two main books. I just want to recommend them from the get-go if anybody's interested in learning things in like way more detail. The first one is called The Road to Jonestown, and it's sort of like an introductory book about the history of them leading up to the Jonestown Massacre. It's a little more surface level. And the other one is called Raven, and it's like a phone book. Like it's super thick, thousands of pages. It pretty much describes Jim Jones' life and everything he did and everybody he was involved with from birth until death. It's super exhaustive. That's kind of the main source of where I learned about everything from, and then research based off of that. But to kind of summarize, Jim Jones, James Warren Jones, he was a American man from Indiana. He was a preacher, had a big interest in religion when he was young, kind of had a rough home life, and then his neighbor would take care of him, take him to church, and he got really involved with the church in that way. He started preaching when he was very young, and ended up eventually forming a congregation kind of out of high school. He moved around a lot and had different congregations, starting in Indiana and then a few different other places. Eventually went to California, to Redwood Valley, kind of ultimately leading to, in the 70s, moving to San Francisco, kind of in the downtown core. And then obviously at this point in his life, he was getting very, very paranoid about his religious beliefs. He was a socialist, and he was very paranoid about government interference. So he ended up moving a lot of his congregation out to Jonestown, which was kind of a settlement in Guyana in the jungle, right outside of Georgetown, where, you know, that's kind of where the cult gets their reputation, is they ended up performing a mass suicide at the end of the 70s, where over 900 people took their lives, including Jim Jones. And then that became, you know, anybody who didn't know about them, it became a big thing. Obviously, the phrase "don't drink the Kool-Aid" come from there, the cult mentality. Yeah, I mean, that's just like a really, really brief outline of all of it, but it's come to be one of the most notorious cults, if not the most notorious cult of all time.
The General Accounting Office has issued a report finding that Secretary of State Cyrus Vance acted properly in spending more than $4 million of taxpayers' money following last November's mass killings in Jonestown, Guyana. The money being used to recover the more than 900 bodies. Mary Tillison reports.
The nightmare at Jonestown left more than 900 members of the People's Temple dead. Americans who had followed the Reverend Jim Jones into the Guyanese jungle in search of a better life. The confusion that followed their mass slaughter has turned into a massive expense for the U.S. government. The State Department so far has spent almost $4,400,000 airlifting the bodies out of Jonestown to Dover, Delaware. There will probably be more money spent burying several hundred bodies that remain at Dover unclaimed. Rhode Island Congressman Edward Beard asked the General Accounting Office to investigate whether taxpayers should have to bear that multi-million-dollar expense. The GAO report, made public today, says the Secretary of State apparently decided money spent in connection with the Jonestown Massacre was in the national interest. While GAO concedes some may disagree with that decision, the Accounting Office found no legal basis for judging U.S. assistance to Guyana improper.
What could you tell us about what their philosophies were? Like, what made them stand out from, you said that he was religious at first. He branched away. What was he doing that was different from his original religious practices?
So that's kind of an interesting point to think about. Jim Jones was like a socialist, and he was super about the people, about equality, about equality for everybody, especially with racism in mind. He was very devout, anti-racist, at least, you know, from what was seen on the outside or from how he presented things. But he did have a very multicultural following, and it was almost as if socialism was more important to him, and a utopia and this future of people getting along than religion was, to a certain extent. Because Jonestown specifically was supposed to be, you know, everyone's equal, everyone puts in the work and shares in everything. It's going to be like a socialist empire, or fantasy land for them, I guess. But it sort of just was, you know, following the structure of Christianity, but then kind of turning a bit and going into more of a political thing than anything else. You know, that was kind of what sort of, in his eyes, ostracized him from the general public and had them become a target for government interference or for, hate and criticism, was his political beliefs wrapped up with the religious beliefs.
So was when they were in San Francisco, what was going on publicly, or what were some of the issues that he was facing that was giving him the paranoia that he had and ultimately motivated him to go to Guyana?
Yeah, so he was Jones was very paranoid about nuclear war. He originally moved the congregation from where they were to the Redwood Valley in California because he read an article about how that was a safe place to hide during nuclear fallout. And then San Francisco as well, and then Guyana as well was on that list of places that would be safe to hide. Near the end of his life, he was getting increasingly paranoid. He was doing a lot of speed, a lot of amphetamines, which is notorious for causing paranoia in people. It was mostly kind of paranoia-driven, self-paranoia, because there was a lot of kind of outside interference from people saying, and I'll show an item later that kind of talks about this, where they faced a lot of criticism for at the time for being very standing out against racism was, a bit a taboo thing to do, being vocal about that. And just kind of the way that their congregation went, the way that people were really devoted to them, they almost had a kind of cult-like mentality beforehand, or they would take a lot of people's possessions, or he would kind of rearrange marriages and stuff. They were getting all these kind of warning signs before he went to Jonestown. So the culmination of that with his paranoia, getting a bit of criticisms, kind of just blew things up for him. And I wouldn't say that before they left to Guyana there was really too much of a warning sign about what was going to happen. I think that the paranoia really ramped up like 1,000% when he did leave the States.
Yesterday in California, the first of dozens of caskets were put beneath the surface of the earth. They are the remains of some of those who died at the Jonestown commune in Guyana. It is part of the tragic story that even to now is not over. Vern Hawkins has a report.
Just before dawn, a van carrying 50 victims arrived at Evergreen Cemetery. Inside, small pine boxes containing 45-inch steel caskets to be placed in cement crypts. These are the bodies of unidentified children. In place of names, just numbers on the boxes. This is the first of 248 unidentified followers to be buried here. Other cemeteries had refused. The containers were moved into the 60 by 80-foot mass grave, which will have a single marker. Relatives came to watch. Florence Brown's 4 grandchildren were never identified. She said they had to be here, somewhere. Freddie Lewis's entire family died in Guyana. Only the older members were identified.
Wife and sister, 2 older daughters. My 2 older daughters are Lisa and Karen. They've been identified already. The other kids hasn't been identified yet.
They may be here.
It may be here, might be on their way.
So when they touched down in Guyana, was he still paranoid, or did he feel relieved that they had kind of found a refuge away from the U.S.?
I think that I don't think it really helped much, to be honest, because obviously things escalated from there. He is seen at that time looking very bloated. He was a lot heavier when he was in Guyana. He looked a lot more haggard. You can see in the interviews that happened on the last few days of Jonestown, he has extreme paranoia. I don't want to we'll talk about that in a second, I guess. I don't want to jump ahead here, but yeah, the last few days, the last little time that he was there definitely seemed a lot more chaotic and stressful than ever. His kind of reign over the members of the People's Temple while he was in Guyana just ramped up, got worse and worse and worse. Very totalitarian-esque kind of way of being in charge, and definitely became more extreme. It didn't really give him the relief that he was looking for, so to say.
And so what circumstances and events took place leading up to the mass suicides?
I think a really interesting story. This is why I got interested in Jonestown in the first place, right? It's kind of the events that happened at the very end of days. So Congressman Leo Ryan, who's a congressman in San Francisco, he was getting a lot of contact from people. I think the group was called the Concerned Families and Relatives, something or other. Anyway, it was a group that was kind of saying, hey, our family members are here against their will. They're being held there in the jungle. We want to make sure they're okay. We want to help out. So Leo Ryan and a handful of other people flew to Guyana, kind of to spend a few days there to see how things were. The families were in a rough position. So in the evening that they're there, everyone looks really happy. They're doing musical performances and dances. It's a big party. Leo Ryan, said something about, I don't imagine why anybody wouldn't want to be here. This is great. I don't think these rumors are true. So, like everything I've seen leads me to believe that it's great. So the next morning, somebody slipped a note to one of the people he was with. He was with a camera crew, right? Which is very lucky that we have, a lot of archival footage of this happening. Somebody slipped a note saying, hey, this place is terrible. I want to go. He approached Jones, and there's a very famous interview with Jim Jones where he's wearing like a red shirt and his sunglasses, and he's all stressed and frazzled, saying like, nobody's held against their will. If they want to go, they can go. Just leave us alone. Leave us alone. Let us be. We don't want interference.
Last night, someone came and passed me this note.
He's the one that I'm just talking about. Yeah, this is the man that wants to leave his son here.
Doesn't it concern you, though, that this man, for whatever reason, one of the people in your group...
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about lies? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here. We have no problem about getting out of here. They come and go all the time. I don't know what kind of game. People like publicity. Some people do. I don't. But some people like publicity. But if it's so damn bad, why is he leaving his son here? Can you give me a good reason for that?
So he ended up taking in the back of a truck a handful of people from Jonestown, and they drove out to an airstrip in Guyana to leave for San Francisco. Anyway, pretty much when they left, Jones sent a truck of people after them with guns, and then kind of started the steps towards the mass suicide. They made up the batches of cyanide that everyone drank and was injected into the kids. Jones started recording audio of himself, saying this is a revolutionary suicide, and we're not going to let them shut us down. We're doing this before they can do it to us because they're going to come kill us anyway. And it's like a 40-minute tape. I think it's very, very cool that's survived and that's become a thing that's out there. The suicide tape.
Yeah, I think that's a really almost like an iconic thing that when you start diving into true crime and Murderabilia, like you discover that tape, and it's pretty haunting to listen to.
Oh, for sure.
But to me, death is not a fearful thing. It's living that's treacherous.
Well, I don't see it like that. I mean, I feel like that as long as there's life, there's hope. That's my faith.
Well, everybody dies. Someplace that hope runs out because everybody dies. I haven't seen anybody yet that didn't die. And I like to choose my own kind of death for a change. I'm tired of being tormented to hell. That's what I'm tired of. Tired of it. 1,200 people's lives in my hands, and I certainly don't want your life in my hand. But I'm going to tell you, Christine, without me, life has no meaning. I'm the best friend you'll ever have. And once I have to pay, I'm standing with you, Jara. I'm standing with those people. They're part of me. I can detach myself. My attorney says detach myself. No. I never detached myself from any of your troubles. I've always taken your troubles right on my shoulders. And I'm not going to change that now. It's too late. I've been running too long. I'm not going to change now. What I'm talking about now is in the dispensation of judgment. This is a revolutionary suicide council. I'm not talking about self-destruction. I'm talking about what we have no other road. I will take your call. We will put it to the Russians, and I can tell you the answer now because I'm a prophet.
So not only that, but there was a camera crew at the airstrip, and as they were all loading onto a plane, a truck drove up and people got out and started shooting assault rifles at the people who were leaving. Leo Ryan was killed. Jackie Spear was a woman who was there. She was shot, but she survived. I think 11 or 12 people were killed on the airstrip. That's all on video as well. So this is happening simultaneously as the mass suicides. Obviously, that was the culmination. That was the end of things at Jonestown.
We have two tales of terror and death to tell you tonight from two different parts of the world. In Guyana, a California congressman, 3 American journalists, and a woman were gunned down, murdered by a gang of fanatics. Congressman Leo Ryan had gone to the town of Georgetown in Guyana to investigate allegations that some young Californians were being held prisoners and virtual slaves by a mysterious cult called the People's Temple. The congressman and his group were getting ready to board a couple of planes last night at a jungle airstrip. There were some cult members with him who said they wanted to leave, but one of them pulled a gun and started shooting at the other defectors. And then a truckload of people pulled up and they started shooting too. Ryan was killed. So was NBC News correspondent Don Harris, along with his cameraman Bob Brown. A photographer for the San Francisco Examiner, Gregory Robinson, was also killed. We don't know the name of the woman who was gunned down. Two lawyers who work for the People's Temple were also with the group, Mark Lane and Charles Gary. The latest word we have on the two of them is that they are okay and they're at the temple.
Well, Odell Rhodes of Detroit was a witness to the Jonestown mass suicide in Guyana. He said that he escaped the suicide ritual by hiding under a nursing station at the jungle commune. Today in Guyana, Rhodes explained how the poison was administered.
They took their equipment into a tent that was used as a library in school, and they brought over syringes, large size syringes, minus the needles, and they had small plastic containers with liquid solution in it and a large vat of what appeared to be punch, and they would draw up an amount in the syringes, and he had babies and children go first, and they would take the syringe, and nurse or other people who were administering it would simply put it into the person's mouth, and they would swallow it and then give them a small drink of punch to wash it down.
Were the people willing to do this?
Well, the first person that went up was a young mother. I'd say she was about 27 or so. She had a small baby, and I'd say the baby was approximately 1.5, something like that. She walked up and she administered to her own baby, and then she took her home, and then she went over into a field and sat down, and that's, it was hard to believe. I could understand older people maybe, but I couldn't understand these young people just doing that.
But the question is, were people prodded?
A lot of the children were crying, and he was telling them not to tell the children that they were dying, not to tell them it was painful. He was telling people it wasn't painful, and that, people had to die with dignity.
My personal interest in it came from the fact that, there was all this insane documentation from the very end of days from the 78. And I was wondering, well, they were around since like the 60s, like what was happening in that time? Where are the things from there? Where are the documents? Where are the items? Where are the photographs? I was very interested in kind of filling that in between, right? And hunting for any items that might be missing in the fray. That's what got me into collecting in the first place, was finding these kind of artifacts for Jonestown specifically. And then here we are now, where I have, a substantial collection from them, always finding new things and learning new things about kind of artifacts and stuff they left behind. And that's about it.
So with you having spent so many years collecting items from this case, what are some things that you could share with us for us to see?
So I just actually reorganized. I have a People's Temple binder here. When I first started collecting this, and I guess this goes for any kind of true crime case or cult or anything, I was collecting stuff like the Time magazine and the Newsweek magazine with the photos from the suicides, any kind of books that were written about the cult, any kind of movies that have been made about them. And then it branched into kind of heavier items from there, so to say, things that were more actually related to the cult. And then, it kind of just got a lot of momentum. Right now, I probably have the most inventory of Jonestown items than I ever have at once, which is cool. So I'm going to show off, kind of go through all of it real quickly here. Pretty much this stuff is all kind of inventory on the site, except for this first item. This one I got recently. I actually had one of these, and it went to a museum because it's a pretty rare item. And then I got another one more recently. Somebody said, hey, I got this item. It's beat up. It's old, but do you want it? I like what you do. So it was a gift. I'm keeping this one for myself. But this is a copy of Jim Jones' yearbook from 1949.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's, you can see it's pretty beat up. It's falling apart, which makes sense. but this class was extremely small. So to have an item from this time, this old, right, still intact, is pretty rare, let alone to have come across a few of them in my life. So you can see here, this is Jim Jones here. Somebody wrote, "Boo, Jonestown, Guyana," made a little note about it. I think I'll scan this too to get a better photo of it, but that's Jim Jones in high school, 1949. He was obviously, involved with the religious stuff at this time, and it just grew from there. Second thing here, and this is honestly, you'd think a bit pretty rare, but one of the more common items when it comes to actual temple relics. So when the temple shut down, 1979, 1980 or whatever, they auctioned off all the assets. They auctioned off their buses. I read an article about a guy who bought Jim Jones' podium, but I spent years looking for that, haven't found it. And then they sold copies of this album, He's Able. So they had recorded this gospel album and pressed records in San Francisco with the congregation. And finding these now, most of them are sealed. So what I think probably happened is at the auction, they had like tons of dead stock boxes they sold off, and somebody just bought all of them. They eventually would sell 1 or 2 copies over the years because they kind of slowly leak into the market. But you can see on the back, there's a great photo of Jim Jones there. And it's honestly, I don't really know much about gospel music, but it's pretty good music and haunting when you kind of have the context of the mass suicides in mind. This binder here, which is kind of some of the heavier, well, I guess it's all kind of heavy hitting, to be honest. It's pretty rare stuff, but this is an anointed picture of Jim Jones. It kind of would have been given out to people in the congregation, like, here's a photo of your pastor. I'll read it out actually. Here's your anointed picture of Pastor Jim Jones. Use it in faith and watch the blessings come your way. And then the People's Temple Christian Church, P.O. Box 214, Redwood Valley, California. So this was pre-San Francisco, which is hard to find something from. I've only ever seen 2 of these. The first one was just the photo, not the part on the side here. It was about half the size, and it was in a historical archive in California. Somebody had apparently been reading a book, and it just fell out between the pages at their grandmother's house. And they sent it there to be archived and kept. This one is the only one I've seen like in a private collection at all, which is really cool. Kind of a bummer I can't keep it, that it's sold, but there's a big market for Jonestown stuff out there for sure. Along with that, I got this, which I've had a couple of in the past. It's a photo of Jim Jones in Jonestown with a parrot there. His sunglasses, you can tell this is later in his life. He's a bit heavier. This is kind of in the very late 70s. This was kind of like a promotional thing taken in Jonestown and sent out. It's almost like the size of a coaster, actually, but I'm not sure exactly what the context of it was, but I know these were sent to people from Jonestown as like a promotional material thing. This one right here, I was really excited to get a long time ago, and this was a personal item that's now kind of being sold because I rotate things out as I go sometimes. This is an envelope from Jonestown, from the People's Temple Medical Services. So they it's got the Georgetown, Guyana address. And Georgetown is close to where Jonestown was. Jonestown was essentially deep in the woods. Georgetown was kind of the in-between spot where they had their headquarters, where they communicated with the U.S., so they could have gotten their mail. It was the in-between spot. So it's very cool to kind of have that in-between thing. And then we'll get into these. I have a couple of these. This is what I think is one of the most exciting items, or for me at least, the most interesting items, are these copies of the People's Forum. So this was a newspaper that they would have handed out in the streets in San Francisco. So you got to think that, imagine you're walking down and you get a random religious pamphlet in the street. You're probably going to toss it out. You're not going to bring it home and save it. And somebody had preserved a lot of these. So every once in a while, you'll see a copy come up. But yeah, so this one was from 1977. On the front, it's got a quote from Jim Jones speaking publicly to members of his congregation and supporters via telephone relay from Guyana, South America. At this point, obviously, he's already out in Guyana. There's a Inside People's Temple expose here, where it's kind of taking some criticism and saying, hey, that's not true. I think there might be a good picture of Jones in this one too. But basically, it's a newsletter that was written by the People's Temple for the People's Temple. Most of it seems to be just kind of responding to criticisms or controversies and saying like, hey, that's not true, we're great, da-da-da-da-da. I've got a couple of the copies of that. Here's another one, a different issue. I've had 4 or 5 of these in the past, and they're super rare, but I tend to, I've only ever gotten different issues. I never found the same issue twice, so I've been lucky to kind of have different ones come across. And the last one here too, to kind of wrap the whole story around with him being, you know, a big advocacy for racial rights and stuff. This is a Black Panther newsletter from right after the Jonestown Massacre. Kind of talks about the alleged CIA involvement and CIA brainwashing, government interference that led to the suicides, which, you know, obviously has been debunked, is, you know, kind of like it's a conspiracy theory basically, right? But it was sort of like he had very good ties with, you know, even the Black Panthers, with a lot of like different kind of groups throughout the time of the temple. And kind of the biggest tragedy with things, the most unfortunate thing, is that Jonestown for a while seemed like it could have been a good idea. Paranoia kind of derailed it, obviously, but there were a lot of like genuinely good people in the congregation. There was a lot of good intention. There was a lot of like real care being put forth, you know, and these people just kind of got involved and then got strung along, and it ended up bad for them. But you know, for a time being, there were very positive aspects to the temple.
What was taking place in Jonestown that was motivating people to want to leave? Do you know?
Oh, it was kind of just like, so everyone was doing a lot of manual labor all the time, working super long days, either farming or making clothes to sell or making toys to sell. It was a jungle, obviously, so it was pretty harsh weather conditions. People were eating a lot of like rice, a lot of very basic foods. They weren't being fed very well or kept super healthy. It was kind of just like almost just like a bad camp, like just really bad care, really bad quality of life. Jones would like lock people up in these little boxes as like prisons to make them to kind of punish them for things. He was a lunatic at that point, to be honest. He would have things called white nights, where he would put sirens on in the middle of the night, and everyone would get together and they would fake or do practice runs of a mass suicide to show their devotion. A lot of physical abuse and emotional abuse. It was just kind of from the get-go, just when they got out there, things just deteriorated really fast. And obviously, you know, moving 900 people to a jungle in a different country, it's going to have logistical issues, and I think that wasn't really thought out or planned for fully. That mixed with, you know, his increasing paranoia from amphetamine use, and his ego and his power tripping, just kind of all culminated in like just a bad situation for everybody.
Yeah. Well, one of my last questions is, like one example I can think of is people say don't drink the Kool-Aid, but we both know that it was Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid. What are some of the other misconceptions that you have heard related to the Jonestown Massacre and everything related to them?
I think probably the biggest one is that people kind of think that it was, you know, 918 people or whatever committing suicide. You got to consider the fact that there were children there. The kids are being injected with cyanide with syringes, or being force-fed the cyanide to drink. Obviously, their parents weren't all willing participants in the suicide. You know, there's a lot of people who weren't wanting to do it. It was, just a very, you know, people think that a lot of people went out there and were crazy and like, oh, how would you get sucked into that? How would you get into a cult? But it's very normal, regular people that get involved with that kind of stuff. It just, just how things go sometimes. And no one thinks they're signing up for a cult, right? So to think that it was, over 900 suicides is technically in the way of, you took your own life, you were coerced into it, but it definitely was more of a violent act towards a lot of people, as opposed to that many individuals coming together for one kind of cause, right? It's one of those situations where, like in Heaven's Gate, everyone seemed very willing and understanding of the situation and wanting to take their own lives and what it meant, whereas Jonestown was more of a act of aggression against those people, against their will.
Yeah, and that makes sense because they were so isolated, Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate you sharing that with us, and of course I'm going to have you back on again, so have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.
For sure. Thank you.